"Will you marry me?" Jake asked, his voice trembling as he dropped to one knee in our favorite Italian restaurant. The entire place went silent. I should have been crying tears of joy, but instead my stomach dropped like a stone. The ring. Oh God, the ring. It was gorgeous, a vintage-inspired halo setting with a cushion-cut diamond, delicate mill-grain details, rose gold band. It was absolutely perfect. Too perfect. Because I'd seen this exact ring before, plastered all over someone else's Instagram feed for months, Sarah's Instagram feed. His ex-girlfriend who supposedly broke his heart and disappeared from his life forever. The woman whose pictures he swore he'd deleted but somehow always seemed to know way too much about her current life. As Jake held that ring up, waiting for my answer with hopeful eyes, all I could think was, this isn't meant for me. This was Sarah's dream ring, the one she'd probably worn on that same finger before things ended between them. "No," I whispered, then louder, "No!" I grabbed my purse and ran out of that restaurant like my life depended on it, leaving Jake kneeling there in front of 50 strangers. And honestly, that decision saved my entire future. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. 2 years ago, Jake was everything I thought I wanted in a man. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning when he offered to share his umbrella after I got caught in a downpour without one. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Our first date lasted 6 hours because neither of us wanted it to end. He remembered little details about things I'd mentioned, brought me my favorite flowers, and made me feel like I was the center of his universe. For the first few months, I honestly thought I'd hit the boyfriend jackpot. But even in those early, blissful days, Sarah's ghost was always there, lurking in our conversations like an unwelcome third wheel. Jake would bring her up constantly, usually prefaced with, "My ex used to," or "Sarah always said." At first, I thought he was just being honest about his past, which I actually appreciated. But then it became weird. He'd compare restaurants to places he'd taken her, mention how she didn't like certain movies when we were picking what to watch, or tell stories about their relationship that felt way too detailed and recent. When I gently suggested that maybe he talked about her a bit too much, he'd get defensive and claim he was just processing the trauma of how badly she'd hurt him. He painted this picture of Sarah as this heartless woman who destroyed him emotionally and left him broken. He said she'd played mind games, led him on, and then suddenly vanished from his life without explanation. Stupid me, I felt sorry for him. I thought I was helping him heal from this terrible heartbreak. I convinced myself that his constant Sarah references were just proof of how damaged he was and how much he needed someone stable and understanding like me. Looking back, I should have recognized that a man who couldn't go a single week without mentioning his ex probably wasn't over her. But I was so caught up in being the girl who could fix him that I ignored every single red flag waving frantically in front of my face. The Sarah shrine in Jake's apartment should have been my wake-up call. But instead, I twisted myself into knots trying to be understanding about it. There were framed photos of them together still sitting on his bookshelf, not hidden away in a box like normal people do with ex-memorabilia, but displayed like they were still together. When I asked about them after we'd been dating for 6 months, Jake claimed he just hadn't gotten around to putting them away, and that it wasn't a big deal. He had a jewelry box on his dresser that I later learned contained a bracelet she'd given him, which he still wore sometimes when he thought I wouldn't notice. Her favorite book was still on his nightstand, with little notes she'd written in the margins. He kept a sweater of hers in his closet that apparently smelled like her perfume, and would sometimes pull it out when he was feeling nostalgic. But the worst part wasn't the physical reminders, it was the constant comparisons. Sarah was apparently a fantastic cook, so Jake would make little comments when I burned dinner or ordered takeout too often. Sarah was more adventurous. He'd mention whenever I didn't want to go hiking or try some extreme sport. Sarah was more spontaneous when I liked to plan things in advance. Sarah was more laid back when I had opinions about where we should go or what we should do. Every single thing about me seemed to be measured against the Sarah standard, and somehow I always came up short. The really messed up part is that I started trying to become more like her based on these comments. I took cooking classes, forced myself to be more spontaneous, pretended to like activities I hated, all because I thought that's what Jake really wanted. I convinced myself that I was just being insecure and jealous, that a mature girlfriend wouldn't care about her boyfriend's past. I told myself I was being the cool, understanding girlfriend who didn't make demands or create drama. I actually felt proud of how chill I was being about the whole Sarah situation. What a joke. I was so busy trying to prove I wasn't like those other girls who got jealous and controlling that I completely ignored the fact that my boyfriend was basically using me as a Sarah replacement while still being emotionally attached to the original. I drove to Melissa's house in complete autopilot mode, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I didn't even call ahead. I just showed up at her door at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. Melissa took one look at me and immediately pulled me inside, poured me a glass of wine, and demanded to know what the hell had happened. So I told her everything: the proposal, the restaurant, the way Jake's face crumpled when I said no, and most importantly, the ring. I described it in obsessive detail because something about it was eating away at my brain like a parasite. It was this vintage halo setting, I said, gesturing wildly with my wine glass. Cushion-cut diamond, maybe 2 carats, rose gold band with all these intricate mill-grain details around the edges. It looked custom-made, really expensive, and just... I trailed off, trying to find the words. It looked familiar, Mel, like I'd seen it before, but not on my finger. Melissa got this look on her face that I'd seen before when she was about to deliver bad news, and without saying a word, she grabbed her laptop. What was his ex's name again? Sarah what? Sarah Chen, I said, my stomach already dropping because I could see where this was going. Melissa's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up Instagram, typing in Sarah's handle that I definitely shouldn't have known by heart, but absolutely did. She scrolled back through months of posts, and then she stopped. Emma, she said quietly, turning the laptop toward me. Is this the ring? There it was. Posted 8 months ago with the caption, Someday. The exact same ring that Jake had just tried to put on my finger. Same setting, same stone, same everything. There were multiple photos of it from different angles, clearly taken at a jewelry store, with Sarah gushing about how it was her absolute dream ring and how she'd been designing it in her head for years. The comments were full of her friends saying things like, Jake better take notes, and this is going to be gorgeous on you. I stared at that screen feeling like my entire reality had just shifted sideways, because there was literally no way this was a coincidence. Melissa kept scrolling, and it just got worse. There wasn't just one post about this ring, there were dozens spread across several months. Sarah had documented the entire custom design process like it was her full-time job. She'd posted photos of herself at the jewelry store with the designer, showing off sketches and CAD renderings of her perfect ring. She'd shared close-up shots of different diamond cuts, asking her followers to vote between cushion and oval. She'd posted about choosing between white gold and rose gold, ultimately picking rose gold because it was more unique and romantic. There were even posts about the specific mill-grain details she wanted, how she'd requested extra diamonds in the halo, and why she'd chosen that particular vintage-inspired setting. She'd literally crowdsourced the design of this ring with her Instagram followers, treating it like some kind of public engagement preparation project. The most damning post was from 6 months ago, a photo of her wearing the finished ring on her right hand with the caption, Finally got to see my dream ring in person. Can't wait for someone special to put this on the right finger someday. The comments on that post made me want to throw up. Her friends were going crazy, saying things like, Jake is so lucky you designed his proposal for him, and he better hurry up and use this gorgeous ring. Even her mom had commented with heart eye emojis. Melissa and I sat there in stunned silence, scrolling through what was essentially a 6-month timeline of Sarah designing her own engagement ring and then apparently giving it to Jake to propose to someone else. The level of planning, the custom details, the way she'd involved her entire social media network in the process. There was absolutely no way Jake could claim this was just a coincidence or that he'd independently chosen something similar. This was her ring, designed by her, for her, and somehow it had ended up being offered to me in what was supposed to be the most important moment of my relationship. Emma, Melissa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, this is so much worse than we thought. As the reality of the ring situation sank in, another horrifying thought hit me like a freight train. Jake was broke. Not just working paycheck to paycheck broke, but seriously, financially struggling broke. Over the past year, he'd borrowed money from me at least 6 different times. $500 here for car repairs, $300 there for rent when he was between clients, $1,000 when his laptop died and he needed it for work. He was a freelance graphic designer who could barely keep steady clients, living in a studio apartment with furniture from Facebook Marketplace and eating ramen noodles for dinner half the week. The man had asked me to split the check on our last 3 dates because things were tight right now. Just last month, I'd paid for our weekend getaway because he claimed his credit cards were maxed out. A custom engagement ring like the one Sarah had designed would easily cost $15,000 to $20,000, maybe more. Jake didn't have $1,500 in his savings account, let alone $15,000. I knew this because he'd shown me his bank statement when he was trying to refinance his student loans and needed me to co-sign. The math literally didn't add up. There was no universe in which Jake could have afforded to have that ring custom made. And there was definitely no scenario where he could have afforded to buy it twice, once for Sarah and once for me. Which meant Sarah had to have given it to him. She'd designed her perfect engagement ring, probably expecting him to propose to her, and when that didn't happen for whatever reason, she'd just handed it over for him to give to the next girl. The whole thing was making me feel sick to my stomach. Either Sarah was the most generous ex-girlfriend in history, or there was something much more twisted going on here. Maybe she thought she was being helpful, giving him a way to propose to his new girlfriend. Maybe she was trying to get rid of painful reminders of their relationship. Or maybe, and this thought made my blood run cold, maybe she knew exactly what she was doing, and this was some kind of sick game they were playing together at my expense. Meeting Jake's family 6 months into our relationship should have been a red flag parade, but I was so desperate to believe we had a future together that I ignored every single warning sign his mother threw at me. The dinner was at their house, and Jake's mom, Patricia, had been polite but cold from the moment I walked in. She kept making these little comments throughout the evening that felt like tiny paper cuts. Oh, you work in marketing? How practical. Sarah was studying to be a veterinarian, saving animals and all that. When Jake showed her photos from our recent vacation, she'd squint at them and say things like, you two look so different together than Jake did with Sarah. She was more, how do I put this, vibrant. The worst moment came when we were looking at family photos and Patricia pulled out this album that was basically a shrine to Jake and Sarah's relationship. Page after page of them at family holidays, birthday parties, graduations. Sarah was clearly integrated into this family in a way that felt permanent. Patricia kept narrating each photo like she was conducting a memorial service. This was Christmas 2 years ago. Sarah made the most beautiful cookies. And, oh, here's Easter. Sarah always brought such thoughtful gifts for everyone. When I tried to change the subject, Patricia looked at me with this sad, almost pitying expression and said, you know, Emma, You're lovely, but you're just so different from Sarah. She was the one that got away. I'm afraid. Some people are just meant to be together, and when they're not, she trailed off with this meaningful sigh that made my skin crawl. Jake had laughed awkwardly and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the damage was done. I'd spent the rest of that evening, and honestly, the rest of our relationship, trying to prove to his family that I was worthy of their son, that I could somehow measure up to the sainted Sarah who apparently walked on water and granted wishes to small children. Now, sitting in Melissa's living room staring at photos of Sarah's custom engagement ring, Patricia's words echoed in my head with brutal clarity. Of course, she thought Sarah was the one that got away, because she probably never actually left. I left Melissa's house around midnight with my head spinning and my heart pounding, but instead of going home like a rational person, I decided to drive by Jake's apartment. I told myself I was just going to see if his lights were on, maybe figure out if he was as devastated by my rejection as he should be, but deep down, I think I knew. I was looking for something else, something that would either put my paranoid thoughts to rest or confirm my worst nightmares. Jake lived in a small complex with assigned parking, and I knew his spot by heart after 2 years of visiting. As I turned into his parking lot, my headlights swept across the familiar row of cars, and that's when I saw it. A silver Honda Civic with a distinctive bumper sticker that said, "Rescue dogs are my favorite people." Sarah's car. I'd seen it in enough of her Instagram photos to recognize it immediately. Plus, Jake had pointed it out to me once when we'd run into her at a coffee shop, and he'd made some comment about how she still had that stupid bumper sticker. It was parked right next to Jake's beat-up Subaru like it belonged there, like this was a regular occurrence. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady as I took a picture of the license plate, even though I already knew it was hers. The timestamp showed 12:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night. What possible innocent reason could Sarah have for being at her ex-boyfriend's apartment at midnight on a weeknight? Especially the same night that ex-boyfriend had just proposed to another woman with what was apparently her ring. I sat there in my car for 20 minutes, staring up at Jake's apartment windows, trying to come up with any explanation that didn't involve the two of them being in contact this entire time. Maybe she'd just heard about the proposal and rushed over to, what, celebrate? Offer condolences? Demand her ring back? No matter how I tried to spin it, there was no innocent explanation for this scenario. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they were creating was absolutely devastating. Driving home from Jake's apartment with Sarah's car burned into my retinas, I started doing the math that I should have done 2 years ago. Jake had told me that he and Sarah broke up a few months before we met, claiming she'd basically ghosted him and broken his heart. But as I replayed our early conversations, I realized how vague he'd always been about the actual timeline. When exactly had they broken up? He'd never given me a specific date, just vague references to earlier this year or right before I met you. I'd been so flattered that this supposedly heartbroken man had chosen me to help him heal that I'd never pressed for details. But now, sitting at red lights and trying not to hyperventilate, I was remembering things that didn't add up. Like how he'd known way too much about Sarah's current life for someone who'd been completely cut off from her. He'd mentioned that she'd gotten a new job, moved apartments, or started taking yoga classes, information that you don't just stumble upon about an ex who supposedly vanished from your life. There were the mysterious phone calls he'd take in another room, claiming they were work calls that happened at weird hours. The way he'd sometimes come home from client meetings, smelling like perfume that definitely wasn't mine. How he'd occasionally have new clothes or accessories that he claimed he'd had forever, but that I'd never seen before. The weekend trips to visit his sick grandmother that never seemed to actually involve any grandmothers based on the photos he'd share. Most damning of all, I remembered how comfortable Sarah had seemed that day. We'd run into her at the coffee shop 6 months ago. She hadn't acted like someone seeing an ex who'd broken her heart. She'd acted like someone who was temporarily playing a role, barely suppressing a smile while making polite small talk. They'd hugged goodbye in a way that seemed way too familiar, and Jake had watched her walk away with an expression I'd convinced myself was just nostalgia. What if they'd never actually broken up at all? What if I'd been the other woman this entire time, just too naive and trusting to realize it? I called in sick to work the next morning, which wasn't exactly a lie since I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, and spent the entire day conducting what I can only describe as a full-scale social media investigation. I started with Sarah's Instagram, but her account was private, and we obviously weren't friends. However, Jake had never been particularly careful about hiding his social connections. So I went through his followers and found at least a dozen mutual friends between him and Sarah, college buddies, co-workers, people from their old neighborhood, a whole network of people who would have been posting photos of them together if they were actually spending time together. I created a fake Instagram account, followed a bunch of random people to make it look legitimate, and then started following their mutual friends. Most of them had public accounts, and that's when I hit the jackpot. Jake's college roommate Marcus had posted dozens of group photos over the past year and a half. Photos from birthday parties, barbecues, game nights, holiday gatherings. In at least 8 of these photos, taken during the time Jake and I were supposedly exclusive, there were Jake and Sarah together, not just in the same group photo, but sitting next to each other, his arm around her shoulders, her hand on his leg. In one photo from just 3 months ago, they were sharing a piece of cake at what looked like an engagement party, feeding each other bites like they were the couple celebrating. Another photo from a Halloween party last year showed them in coordinated costumes. Batman and Catwoman, the kind of thing you plan with your actual partner, not your ex. The most recent photo was from a New Year's Eve party posted while Jake and I were supposedly celebrating our anniversary month. There they were, Jake and Sarah kissing at midnight while confetti fell around them. The timestamp showed it was posted at 12:03 a.m. on January 1st. I remembered that night clearly because Jake had claimed he was sick with food poisoning and couldn't see me. I'd spent New Year's Eve alone on my couch, feeling sorry for my poor boyfriend, who was supposedly throwing up in his bathroom while he was actually ringing in the new year with his lips on another woman's. The comments on these photos made everything worse. People saying things like, "You two are so cute together," and "relationship goals." Nobody was treating them like exes. Everyone was treating them like the couple they apparently still were. The deeper I dug through their mutual friends' social media accounts, the more devastating the evidence became. I found photos posted by Jake's cousin Rachel from what she'd captioned as Jake and Sarah's healing weekend in Napa from 3 months ago. 3 months ago. I remembered that weekend with crystal clarity because Jake had told me he needed to go visit his grandmother who was in the hospital after a fall, and he'd been so emotional about it that I'd offered to come with him for support. He'd insisted he needed to go alone because his grandmother didn't do well with strangers and family visits were too overwhelming for her. I'd felt so guilty for even suggesting I come along that I'd spend the weekend meal prepping comfort food for him to take to his poor, injured grandmother. The photos Rachel had posted told a completely different story. There was Jake and Sarah hiking through vineyards, sharing a romantic dinner at what was clearly an expensive restaurant, clinking wine glasses on a hotel balcony overlooking the valley. Sarah was wearing a flowing sundress and looking absolutely radiant, while Jake had his arms wrapped around her from behind in that intimate way couples pose for photos. The caption read, "So proud of these two for taking time to work through their complicated history. Sometimes love needs space to grow back stronger. Healing isn't linear. Closure, second chances, Napa retreat." The comments were even worse. Dozens of people supporting their journey and saying things like, "You two are meant to be," and "Real love always finds a way back." Jake's own mother had commented with heart emojis and "Beautiful photos, sweetie. So glad you're both finding peace." His mother knew. His entire family knew. They'd all been watching Jake and Sarah work on their relationship while I was playing the role of the understanding girlfriend, making him soup and giving him space to grieve his supposedly sick grandmother. I felt like such an idiot. While I was at home respecting his family emergency and proud of myself for being so supportive and low maintenance, he was on a romantic weekend getaway with his ex, apparently working toward getting back together with her while keeping me as some kind of placeholder. As I sat there staring at photos of Jake and Sarah's romantic Napa getaway, the horrible truth finally crystallized in my mind like poison, forming into perfect, deadly clarity. Jake hadn't been getting over Sarah for the past 2 years. He'd been actively maintaining a relationship with her while using me as some kind of cover story or backup plan. Every single thing about our relationship had been a lie. The reason he knew so much about her current life wasn't because he was stalking her social media. It was because they were still together. The mysterious phone calls, the unexplained absences, the way he always seemed to have inside information about her job changes and living situations, it all made perfect sense now. He'd been cheating on me with his ex-girlfriend for our entire relationship, probably trying to figure out which one of us he actually wanted to be with long term. And the ring, God, the ring made everything so much worse. I'd initially thought Sarah had given it back to him out of spite or closure, but now I realized she'd probably given it to him, expecting him to propose to her. She'd designed her perfect engagement ring, shared it with the world, waited for him to finally commit, and when he asked for it back, she probably thought he was finally ready to make their relationship official. She had no idea he was planning to use her custom-designed dream ring to propose to the other woman he'd been stringing along. Sarah wasn't some vindictive ex trying to sabotage my relationship. She was probably just as much a victim of Jake's manipulation as I was. She'd unknowingly handed over the symbol of their future together, thinking she was getting engaged, only to have it used as a prop in his proposal to someone else. The level of betrayal was staggering. Not only had Jake been living a double life for 2 years, but he'd been so arrogant and careless about it that he'd proposed to me with physical evidence of his cheating. He'd literally tried to put another woman's engagement ring on my finger and expected me to be grateful for it. The man had proposed to me with a ring that another woman had designed for herself, probably while he was still sleeping with that same woman, and somehow thought this was an acceptable way to start our marriage. Jake showed up at my apartment the next evening, pounding on my door like the building was on fire. I could hear him through the thin walls before I even got to the peephole. "Emma, come on, open up. We need to talk about this." When I finally let him in, he stormed past me into my living room like he owned the place, running his hands through his hair and pacing around like a caged animal. "What the hell was that last night?" he demanded. "You completely humiliated me in front of everyone. People were staring, Emma. I had to tell the entire restaurant that my girlfriend just rejected my proposal for no reason." I almost laughed at the audacity. "No reason?" I said, crossing my arms. "Jake, that ring belonged to Sarah. I know it did." His face went through this rapid series of expressions: surprise, panic, and then that familiar condescending look he always got when he was about to make me feel crazy. "You're being paranoid," he said, shaking his head like I was a child having a tantrum. "Just because it looks similar to something you think you saw online doesn't mean it's the same ring. Do you know how many vintage-style rings exist in the world?" But I was ready for him this time. I'd printed out screenshots, organized my evidence, prepared for this exact conversation. "It's not similar, Jake. It's identical. Same setting, same stone, same custom details. Sarah posted about designing this exact ring for months." He scoffed and threw his hands up dramatically. "So what if she liked the style? Maybe I was inspired by her taste. Is that a crime? I thought you'd appreciate something beautiful, but apparently you'd rather focus on ancient history than our future together." The gaslighting was masterful, I had to admit. He was making me sound jealous and irrational while positioning himself as the romantic boyfriend who just wanted to make me happy. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Ancient history? I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the screenshots I'd saved. Is this ancient history too? I showed him the photo of his car next to Sarah's at his apartment complex, time-stamped from the night of his proposal. His confident expression finally cracked just a little bit. Jake stared at the photo on my phone for a long moment, and I could literally see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out how to spin this. Finally, he sank into my couch and put his head in his hands with his defeated sigh, like he was the victim in all of this. "Okay, fine," he said, looking up at me with those puppy dog eyes that used to make me melt. "Yes, Sarah gave me the ring, but it's not what you think. Emma, it's complicated." Complicated. The universal excuse for people who get caught doing shitty things. Complicated how? I asked, still standing, because sitting felt too much like accepting his explanation. "She designed that ring when we were together, okay? And when things ended between us, she didn't want it anymore. It was just sitting in her jewelry box, this beautiful, expensive ring that she'd never wear again. When I decided to propose to you, I couldn't afford something that nice on my own, and she offered to let me have it. She said she wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it." He said this like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like I should be grateful that his ex-girlfriend had been so generous with her hand-me-downs. "Jake," I said slowly, trying not to scream, "do you hear yourself right now? You proposed to me with another woman's engagement ring, a ring she designed for herself, hoping you would give it to her." He stood up and started pacing again, getting agitated. "Why does that matter? It's a beautiful ring. I wanted to give you something special, something worthy of you. Would you rather I had proposed with some cheap piece of crap from the mall?" The fact that he genuinely couldn't understand why this was wrong made me feel like I was talking to an alien. "I would rather you had proposed with a ring that was meant for me," I said. "With a ring that represented our relationship, not your relationship with someone else." He threw his hands up in exasperation. "You're being completely irrational about this. Sarah and I are over. She's trying to be supportive of our relationship by letting me use the ring. Can't you see how mature and healthy that is?" I pulled out my phone again and started scrolling through all the screenshots I'd organized. "Mature and healthy?" I said, my voice getting louder. "Jake, let me show you just how mature and healthy your relationship with Sarah really is." I held up the first photo. Him and Sarah at Marcus's birthday party 4 months ago, his arm around her waist. "This was taken while we were supposedly exclusive." His eyes widened, but I kept going before he could interrupt. "Here's you two at Halloween, in matching costumes." I swiped to the next photo. "Here's your New Year's Eve kiss while I was home alone because you claimed you had food poisoning." Jake's face went completely white. "And here," I said, pulling up the Napa photos, "is your romantic healing weekend with Sarah 3 months ago, while you told me you were visiting your sick grandmother in the hospital." I watched his mouth open and close, like a fish gasping for air. "Emma, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted. "Can you explain why you've been photographed with your supposedly heartbroken ex-girlfriend at least a dozen times during our relationship? Can you explain why your family treats her like she's still part of the family? Can you explain why her car was at your apartment at midnight on the same night you proposed to me with her ring?" Jake sat back down, heavily, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked completely defeated. The confident, charming facade was cracking, and underneath it was just a panicked man who'd been caught red-handed. "It's not... we weren't..." he stammered, but then stopped. He knew there was no point in denying it anymore. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long have you been cheating on me?" He looked up at me with this pathetic expression, like he was hoping I'd suddenly decide to feel sorry for him. "Emma, please, you have to understand. Sarah and I have history. We've been trying to figure things out, but I do love you. I chose you. I proposed to you." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught with overwhelming evidence, he was still trying to make this about his feelings and his choices, like I should be honored to be picked by someone who'd been lying to me for 2 years. Jake's defeated expression quickly morphed into something uglier, anger mixed with desperation, like a cornered animal lashing out. "You know what, Emma? This is exactly why Sarah and I work better together. You're being completely unreasonable about this whole thing. Do you realize what you've done? You've been stalking my social media, screenshotting private photos, violating my privacy and Sarah's privacy. You've been snooping around like some kind of detective instead of trusting your boyfriend. His voice was getting louder and more aggressive with each word. I proposed to you. I chose you. Doesn't that mean anything? I could have proposed to Sarah months ago, but I didn't. I picked you, Emma. I was ready to spend my life with you. And you're throwing it all away because of some ridiculous jealousy over ancient history. I stared at him in amazement, watching him try to flip the script and make me the villain in this story. You chose me? I said incredulously. Jake, you've been cheating on me with Sarah for our entire relationship. You proposed to me with her ring while you were still sleeping with her. That's not choosing me. That's hedging your bets. But he was on a roll now, pacing around my living room like he was the injured party. I never cheated on you. Sarah and I have a complicated relationship, yes, but we were working through our issues. That doesn't mean I was cheating. You're being dramatic and paranoid, just like you always are. This is why I couldn't tell you about her, because I knew you'd react exactly like this. And there it was, the gaslighting masterpiece I'd been blind to for 2 years. Everything was my fault. My jealousy, my paranoia, my inability to be the cool girlfriend who didn't ask questions or have boundaries. He'd been training me this entire time to accept less, to doubt myself, to feel grateful for whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. You're right, I said finally, and his face lit up with hope. I am being dramatic. I'm being so dramatic that I want you to get out of my apartment and never come back. We're done, Jake. Completely done. Jake's face went from hopeful to absolutely furious in about 2 seconds. You can't be serious, he said, his voice taking on this threatening edge I'd never heard before. Emma, you're making a huge mistake. You're never going to find someone who loves you the way I do. Sarah and I might have history, but you and I have a future. Don't throw that away because you can't handle a little complexity. I walked to my front door and opened it wide. Get out, I said calmly. Get out right now, and don't ever contact me again. He stood there for a moment like he couldn't believe this was actually happening, then suddenly lunged toward me like he was going to grab my arm. Emma, please, just listen. Get out! I screamed, loud enough that my neighbors probably heard. Something in my voice must have finally gotten through to him, because he stopped in his tracks, grabbed his jacket, and stormed toward the door. You're going to regret this, he said as he walked past me. When you're 40 and alone, you're going to remember the man who wanted to marry you, and you'll realize what an idiot you were. I slammed the door behind him so hard the pictures on my wall rattled, then immediately turned all 3 deadbolts and put on the chain. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from pure adrenaline and rage, and something that felt almost like relief. I called Melissa before I even sat down. It's over, I said when she picked up. I need you to come over and help me pack up his stuff because I want it out of my apartment tonight. She was there within an hour with wine, garbage bags, and the kind of righteous fury that only best friends can muster on your behalf. We spent the next 3 hours going through my apartment like a military operation, collecting every trace of Jake's presence, his spare clothes, his toothbrush, the books he'd left on my nightstand, the coffee mug he always used, even a phone charger that might have been his. Everything went into boxes that I planned to leave outside his apartment building the next day. While we packed, I blocked his number, blocked him on every social media platform, and blocked his email address. Melissa helped me change my Netflix password and even called my building's front desk to make sure Jake's name was removed from the guest list. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake launched what I can only describe as a full-scale campaign to get back into my life, and since I'd blocked him everywhere, he had to get creative about it. It started with my coworker Jessica texting me during lunch. Hey, your boyfriend Jake reached out to me on LinkedIn asking if I could pass along a message. He says you misunderstood something and he really needs to talk to you. I showed Melissa the message and we both started laughing because the idea of Jake using LinkedIn as a romantic communication platform was so pathetic, it was almost endearing. almost. Then my college roommate called saying Jake had found her on Facebook and sent her a long, rambling message about how I was going through a rough patch and had gotten some bad advice from friends that was making me act irrationally. He'd apparently told her that we'd had a silly fight about wedding planning and he was just trying to apologize and move forward. The manipulation was masterful. He was positioning himself as the patient, loving boyfriend dealing with his unstable girlfriend's breakdown. My gym trainer mentioned that some guy had approached her in the parking lot asking about me, claiming to be my boyfriend and saying he was worried about my mental health. That one actually scared me a little because it meant he'd been watching my routine, figuring out where I'd be and when. But the most infuriating attempt came through my own mother. Jake somehow got her phone number and called her directly, spinning this elaborate story about how I'd misinterpreted some old photos and was pushing away everyone who loved me because of trust issues from my past relationships. My mom, bless her heart, called me immediately afterwards saying, "Honey, that young man sounds very concerned about you. Maybe you should just hear him out." I had to explain the entire situation to her, including showing her some of the evidence I'd found, before she understood that Jake wasn't a heartbroken boyfriend trying to save our relationship. He was a manipulative cheater who couldn't accept being held accountable for his actions. Every single message, every attempt at contact, just reinforced that I'd made the right decision. A man who truly loved me wouldn't be trying to manipulate my friends and family into pressuring me to take him back. About 6 weeks after I'd kicked Jake out of my life, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I'd been going to therapy, hanging out with friends I'd neglected during the relationship, and generally remembering what it felt like to not constantly question my own sanity. Then Melissa called me on a Saturday morning with news that was somehow both completely predictable and absolutely infuriating. "You're not going to believe this," she said, "but Jake and Sarah just posted their engagement announcement on Facebook." I actually started laughing, which probably wasn't the reaction Melissa was expecting. "Are you serious right now? They're engaged?" "It gets better," she continued. The post says they're so grateful for their journey of growth and self-discovery and how they've learned that real love always finds its way back. Oh, and Emma? She's wearing the ring. The same exact ring he tried to give you. I had Melissa send me screenshots because I needed to see this train wreck with my own eyes. There they were, Jake and Sarah looking absolutely radiant in what was clearly a professional engagement photo shoot. The caption was a masterpiece of revisionist history, talking about how they'd needed time apart to grow as individuals and how they were stronger than ever now that they'd worked through their past issues. The comments were full of people congratulating them on their beautiful love story and saying things like, "We always knew you two were meant to be." What really got me was seeing Jake's family in the comments acting like this was the most natural thing in the world. His mother had written, "So happy you two finally found your way back to each other. Welcome home, Sarah." Like Sarah had just returned from a brief vacation instead of supposedly breaking her son's heart and disappearing from his life. The whole thing confirmed everything I'd suspected. I had never been his girlfriend. I'd been his placeholder, his backup plan, the woman he kept around while he figured out how to win back the love of his life. All those months of him making me feel crazy for being jealous of Sarah, all the gaslighting about how I was being dramatic and insecure. It had all been projection. He'd been the one living a lie, and somehow he'd managed to make me feel guilty for noticing. It's been 8 months since the proposal disaster, and I can honestly say that rejecting Jake's ring was the best decision I've ever made in my life. I'm dating again, slowly, carefully, but with a level of self-awareness I never had before. When red flags pop up now, I actually pay attention to them instead of explaining them away or making excuses for behavior that doesn't sit right with me. I've learned to trust that sick feeling in my stomach when something doesn't add up, because it turns out my instincts were trying to save me for 2 whole years while my brain was busy convincing me to be the cool girlfriend. The whole experience taught me that love shouldn't require you to ignore obvious problems or doubt your own reality. Real love doesn't involve secret relationships, borrowed engagement rings, or being made to feel crazy for asking reasonable questions. I've also realized how much energy I was wasting trying to be someone else, trying to be more like Sarah, more understanding, more accommodating, less demanding. The right person isn't going to require you to shrink yourself or compete with someone from their past. They're going to choose you clearly and completely, without keeping backup options or maintaining complicated relationships with exes. I still think about Jake sometimes, usually when I see happy couples, and remember how grateful I am that I'm not trapped in a marriage built on lies and manipulation. I dodged a bullet so massive it was practically a cannonball. Can you imagine if I'd said yes that night? I'd probably be planning a wedding right now, while my fiancé continued his secret relationship with his actual girlfriend, or worse. I'd be divorced within a year when the truth finally came out. The funniest part is that Jake probably thinks he won in the end. He got the girl he really wanted, and I'm the one who lost him. But honestly, losing Jake was like finally removing a splinter I'd been carrying around for 2 years. The relief was immediate and life changing. So here's my question for you. Do you think I was right to trust my gut and run? Or should I have tried to work things out with a man who proposed to me with another woman's ring while maintaining a secret relationship with that same woman? Because personally, I think that engagement ring saved my entire future.